Okay, thank you for coming along today. I'm Jennie Turner. I'm the Head of Department for ESOL at Greenwich Community College currently, although that may not be the case into the future. I'm also active on the Natecla Management Council, and last year I was active in the Action+for+ESOL campaign. I'm going to talk a bit about the background to the manifesto, and then Mel's going to talk about the manifesto itself. I'd like to start by saying that in the last few years, I really feel that ESOL has gone from being the goose that laid the golden egg to the ugly duckling. How's this happened? There it is. 10 years ago, we were central to the government Skills for Life agenda. We were funded up to the eyeballs, in theory at least, although many colleges just took the money and ran, without ever properly investing in ESOL. We were propped up on an infrastructure of curricula, qualifications for learners, qualifications for teachers, conferences, research, learning materials, diagnostic materials, you name it. We've also, in the last 10 years, been subject to a huge array of targets and quality standards. Remember PSA targets, teacher qualification targets, success rates, and of course, audit. There's been endless discussion of the value or otherwise of ILPs. We've had lots of Ofsted inspections. We've had lots of questions about the quality of our provision. And we've also had some sort of perverse outcomes from funding, with sometimes the most needy students, those with low levels of literacy, for example, being pushed out of provision in favour of those who can achieve. We found ourselves torn between the requirements of different government departments, expected to make good citizens of our students for the Home Office, socially including them for DCLG, making them employable for the DWP, and skilled for almost anything for BIS. We've seen our provision go from free to co-funded, from funded at 1.4 for each learner to 1.2 to just 1. We've had a huge battle over eligibility for those on benefits. With the introduction of fees a few years ago came a whole new set of priorities, and a new approach to ESOL was rolled out across the country with the aim of getting the right students into classes. The new approach became old news, though, with the change of government. And since then, really, I feel that we've been watching the whole infrastructure of Skills for Life being picked apart. We now see adult funding shrinking by 25% over 4 years, with a focus on apprenticeships, questions over what ESOL qualifications will be available after next year, as Judy just said, the possible listing of functional skills. So even though they're not suitable, we may not even have the time to deliver them. Questions over the funding of asylum seekers, older learners, and those not on the path to employment. The requirements for teachers to be professionally qualified in FE may be dropped, as Judy just said as well. And according to FE Week, which is a sort of newspaper, about 50 colleges are undergoing consultations currently on job cuts, affecting potentially 500 jobs across the sector. I don't mean in ESOL specifically, but some of these certainly will be in ESOL, including at 7 at my own college. And of course, in the ESOL world, many staff still are part-time agency or kind of freelance workers. So it was in this context, really, being constantly at the whim of politicians, that Action+for+ESOL was formed and fought an extraordinary campaign last year to save our students from becoming ineligible for funding and to save our jobs, of course. The manifesto, which Mel is going to speak about now, came about as a result of activists in the campaign really feeling that they wanted to assert the values of the profession for themselves without constantly being dictated to and pushed around from above. So I'm going to pass you over to Mel now.
Thanks, Jenny. My name's Melanie Cooke. I work at King's College London. And prior to that, I was an ESOL teacher in FE for a long time. So I kind of bridge the supposed research practice gap, and I was very active in the Action+for+ESOL campaign, less so now because I'm trying to do other things. But after Jennie's kind of slightly gloomy but unfortunately realistic explanation of what's going on, I'm going to be kind of yin and yang to her and be a bit more upbeat by talking about what was actually a successful campaign, which these days I think you'd agree is something to celebrate, the fact that we actually did get a U-turn, albeit maybe temporary and albeit within a larger backdrop of bigger austerity measures. We did achieve something. And one of the things that came out of the campaign Action+for+ESOL was the manifesto, which we have some copies of. If you haven't picked one up, please do so. And I'd like to leave a couple of minutes at the end just to talk about what people think about this, what they've done with it, if anything, what they think they might be able to do with it, because one of the problems with something like this is that, you know, we put a lot of energy into producing it, we produce it, and then what happens to it? It might just wither on the vine to a certain extent because teachers are busy, because they don't know about it, because we don't have the wherewithal to disseminate it and so on, you know, which is partly why we're talking about it today. So the manifesto grew out of the campaign, and this fact is significant for several reasons. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about the amazing energy and creativity and achievements of the campaign, because I think most people in this audience are probably familiar with that story by now. And a lot of people here were actually involved in the campaign to differing degrees. Here are some pictures, though, to remind you. So there's some students at Greenwich who, symbolising the fact that they felt that they were being silenced by cuts to ESOL. And they went along on the Day of Action on the 24th of March last year, which was held in Westminster, got onto South East at 6. It's a very successful day. And that's another thing that was organised by students and staff at South Thames, a shout out that happened at Hammersmith in West London as well, and some other places. And that's, who knows, today might be the re-elected Mayor of London once more, but in this post he was in the opposition, who went also down to Greenwich. Greenwich did an enormous amount of work in this campaign at an institutional level, very interesting. So he met some students, made some comments about it, and there's an earlier demonstration in Hackney of people in the first wave when we first found out about the threat and so on. I don't know if I've got any more there. I'll talk about that in a minute. I was going to show a film that was made by some students of Karen Dudley from her project called Welcome to the UK. But we can't get the technology to work. But it doesn't matter, because I think most of you have probably already seen it. And you can get it on YouTube. It's a very, very inspiring video made by students who learned every step of the filmmaking process, from how to handle a camera, how to do interviews, how to storyboard, and so on. And the students used these skills to make an impromptu film on the 24th of March, which really gives us a grassroots view of the campaign from those directly affected. It's really worth a view. And I was going to show that because it's an example of a way of working with students, which I've been very interested in for the last couple of years, in which lots of teachers have been kind of taken on, which is called participatory pedagogy. And there's a program called Reflect, which is an example of participatory pedagogy, but it's not the only one that you know, does participatory pedagogy. It's the filmmaker that worked with Karen also uses participatory pedagogy. And this is what we used in order to work up this manifesto. So that's the kind of link. So for me, the link between teaching and learning and empowerment and activism and action was one of the most important parts of the campaign and one of the most important, interesting things that came out of it. So in many classrooms last year, thanks to this threat hanging over them, students and teachers not only engaged with pressing contemporary issues, but with language and literacy way beyond their designated levels. In the process, I would suggest that they learned more and thought more analytically and critically than they were ever likely to have done in a standard ESOL class. I put that out to you. Having worked in classrooms where students were doing work around this real life thing that was going on, this real threat, very, very exciting things happened in terms of language and literacy learning. A classroom I worked in at Tower Hamlets with Becky Winstanley worked on a series of lessons that went on for quite a long time around the ESOL cuts, in which they worked very analytically and very kind of deeply around. This is what they call a tree in the Reflect pedagogy, where the roots represent the causes, obviously the roots of a particular issue that people are engaging with. The branches represent the consequences, so cause and effect. This slide here is showing some work that the same class did about protest, forms of protest, in which they were discussing what's effective, what isn't effective, and so on. So I give these two as an example of the kind of work that was done. This led on to lots and lots more work, which I'm not going to talk about today because I don't have time. This link that I'm kind of drawing attention to between politics and our professional practice and teaching and learning is something that the campaign went on to explore in more depth. Using participatory methods, we held 2 seminars, which quite a few people here are actually involved in, which culminated in the ESOL manifesto, which we launched in March. The idea came out of the concern that ESOL was being put back into the margins and that everything we'd learned and gained over the last 10 years was at risk, as Jennie has demonstrated quite graphically. ESOL has long fought from a defensive position, struggling to defend the ground we've gained in what remains a Cinderella subject in a Cinderella sector. But given the huge threat to our profession, we realised it was crucial that teachers themselves, not Ofsted inspectors or managers or policymakers, put a statement out of our priorities, beliefs and values to strengthen our collective professional identity and to be more ready to defend ourselves against the next threat. So I won't go into the process of how we came up with the manifesto because it was quite long, but it was very interesting. And there was quite a lot of people who spent 2 days working up their ideas and arguing and discussing around what we said should be in it. It represents the voices of probably around 100 contributors, although this is difficult to say because we put it out onto the ESOL research lists and some email lists, and we received back bits and pieces of feedback. It's difficult to say how many people really did work on this, which is part of the interesting thing about this kind of work. And it is a broad statement of what we believe, what we want, what we care about, and so on. And it covers a whole range of issues, from funding to language rights to multiculturalism. Importantly, it links pedagogy, professionalism, and politics, and places the need to defend ESOL against a background of wider struggles. For example, the struggle to defend adult education as a whole, and the struggle against the marginalisation of working-class migrant communities. So I've just pulled out 3 points that we thought we'd highlight from the manifesto, and these are points that Rob Pugh-Trell brought out when we launched this in March, as these are not actually kind of my words, it's something that he and I talked about together before we did this. So we say that the opportunity to learn the language of the community in which he lives is a human right. Officially, it's not a human right. This is up for grabs. What is a human right? Who gets to decide what a human right is anyway? Should it be a human right? We hear a lot about the responsibilities of migrants in public discourse, but we hear less about migrants' rights. So we advocate an entitlement to language education and for reliable, sustained funding. And I've long said this is something that natecla should be lobbying for actually quite strongly. In Australia, they have an official entitlement regardless of who is in power, that people have access to. I mean, not everybody, it's not perfect, but that the idea of an entitlement which lasts as a legal right beyond political administrations who can change that kind of, as the wind blows. We also recognise the social and economic contribution migrants make to the UK and the fact that language can be used as a proxy for race and other less mentionable topics. This could well be a long-term demand for which we need to be lobbying. So we also say that ESOL provision should be accessible, comprehensive and integrated. We talk about reaching out to communities and providing routes onto vocational and academic courses. And we recognise that good language education is crucial, not only for getting by in a new society or finding work, but to have the tools to make a difference. We recognise that ESOL students are a diverse community, and that well-funded provision should reflect our students' different needs and circumstances. So good news that the civil servant did go to Greenwich and see this level of diversity and see what it really looks like on the ground. So we need to defend and extend the provision we already have, but think about our pedagogy as well and how our pedagogy can respond to diversity in the classroom. Is differentiation the best way to go about that? Are ILPs the best way to deal with diversity, or are there other approaches? Finally, we say, and this was the most controversial one that caused the most discussion, as you might imagine, we say ESOL teachers have both a right and responsibility to engage with politics and policy that affects students and ourselves. This is crucial and gets to the heart of the question of what it means to be an adult educator. So there's a big debate about teacher professionalism in FE. There's been the big argument around IFL, who says what professionalism is, who says what the standards are, and so on. But we wanted to make it clear that as teachers, we're not simply technicians whose sole function is to get outstanding lesson observation grades. The manifesto is the work of what we might call activist professionals whose primary loyalties are to our students, our communities, and to our profession. As educators and indeed as citizens, we have both the right and the responsibility to engage with the politics and policy that affect our students and ourselves, we say in the manifesto. So not everyone in the ESOL community supported the campaign by any means, or agreed with the manifesto and what it says. But if nothing else, we hope it'll encourage others to engage with the ideas in it, get involved, have a say in the future of our profession and the students we serve. And we hope that it'll contribute to the larger struggle, i.e. to the defence of public education and the fight against austerity measures which are hitting the poorest and most vulnerable members of our communities. So please take a copy of it, read it, use it in your teaching, and if anyone, I'm probably out of time now, am I? Kind of well out of time? Yes. So I don't know if we've got a minute for any comments that you might have about the manifesto or any thoughts, anybody who's used it and who's thinking about using it, anything at all that you'd like to feed back to us. And as I said, we'll be talking about this again at a conference in July. So hopefully we'll have it as an ongoing dialogue. Thanks.